Welcome back, everybody. So I find gaming history to be incredibly interesting. I love learning about the genesis of the giants of the industry and the underdogs who made a lasting impact, the cultural juggernaut successes and the grotesque failures. All of it is something that I love to learn about. These stories are endlessly fascinating to me. This also includes games that never saw the light of day. There were many games that were never released. Many of them mostly completed, and some that were even fully completed. I thought it would be fun today to take a look at some of the games that were intended for release on the NES, but for one reason or another, never made it across that finish line. The first game that I want to take a look at is based on a fascinating piece of 80s pop culture that was insanely popular, and if you weren't alive at the time, you may find it hard to believe just how pervasive a rhythm and blues band made of partially dried grapes really was. I am of course talking about the California Raisins. The California Raisins were created by an advertising agency in order to promote, well, raisins. The commercials featuring the raisins were produced by Vinton Studios using their claymation technique. I absolutely loved the California Raisins as a kid, owning several toys and merchandise featuring the group. The largest reason for my affection for them is their featuring in a Claymation Christmas, a perennial classic in our household, a required view for the holiday season. I loved Christmas. I loved Christmas specials. I loved Vinton Studios Claymation. I loved music. I was not crazy about raisins, but they had everything else going for them. The California Raisins The Grape Escape was developed by Raisins and intended to be released by Capcom in 1990. By this time though, interest in raisins, singing and otherwise, had dropped. Sales were down and the advertising campaign had run its course. The Grape Escape is a side-scrolling platform game where you play as the wrinkled music group who, let's admit it, were not the most appealing characters, further amplified by their 8-bit representation. As with other Capcom releases, you're provided with a choice of which of the 4 levels to tackle in any order you please, followed by a last level after completing these. You can jump, and you can spray raisin juice on the enemies in order to defeat them. My favorite feature is the use of the select button to enable moonwalking. This design choice... From what I understand, this game was pretty much completed, having been reviewed and advertised in flyers included with Capcom games released around 1990. Playing this game doesn't really feel very good. Enemies constantly spawn out of nowhere with very unforgiving hitboxes. The level design is underwhelming at best, frustratingly bland at worst. The longer I played, the better I got at the game, as one will do, but it never got more satisfying. The music, except for the awesome 8-bit rendition of Heard It Through the Grapevine, was pretty dull and unremarkable, as were the graphics. You tell me that you're rooting for this creature. I was compelled to keep playing because I was, for some unknown reason, convinced that the game had to get better. I blame this on the blinding power of nostalgia. I do have an affinity for this brand, having them been so prevalent in my formative years. Had this game been released, I would have at the very least rented this game. And if I had played this game growing up, it would not be anywhere near the worst game I have played for the system. I owned a lot of stinkers when I was a kid that I played anyway because I had very limited choices. I don't really know how close to completion the ROM I have was to release, but without some substantial overhauls, the game that I played was not very good. It is no great loss that the game never came out. All of that being said, I will probably try to complete this one. I don't know what's wrong with me. Up next is Time Diver Eon Man that was developed by AI for Taito in 1993. This game was finished and even received a 4-page strategy guide in Nintendo Power and a review. I wasn't able to find a reason for the cancellation, but I assume that the year of completion had a role to play in the decision, being so late in the NES lifespan. Time Diver Eon Man is a side-scrolling action game where you play as Dan Nelson traveling through time in order to protect his family from his past ancestors to future descendants. The story is standard silly NES fare. The graphics are very appealing, and this music on the first level is a bop. The controls feel very good. There is a wall jump mechanic that is very well implemented and that is very pleasing to utilize. You have a variety of weapons that you gain along the way to assist you in your quest as you progress through the game. I quite enjoyed my time with this one, and it is a shame that it was never released. I found this to be a genuinely good game, and I am definitely going to spend a lot more time with this one. Our next game is Drac's Night Out. Drac's Night Out was developed by Microsmiths and set to be published by Parker Brothers in 1991. The game was sponsored by the Reebok Pump Shoe, which is a very odd partnership. The only thing I really know about the Reebok Pump is this scene from Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Time out! Excuse me, bad guys. I am running out of air. Gotta get pumped. Okay, honkies. Time in!
The pump certainly doesn't bring to mind Count Dracula. In the game, you take control of Dracula, who must make his way through a castle while avoiding villagers on his way to his bride, Mina. At his disposal, Dracula is able to hypnotize villagers to subdue them and then can suck their blood. There are also traps scattered throughout the level that can be activated, defeating enemies. See this log here? This is a switch to activate a trap. I did not realize this for a while when I first started playing this game. The Reebok pumps are power-ups scattered in the game that increase your speed and allow you to jump higher. I found Dracula very hard to control after I had picked up the pumps, and it was not something that I felt really assisted me in this game, often causing me trouble and leading me to avoid picking them up altogether. I didn't really get very far in this game. I found a lot of the design choices to be pretty frustrating. I did enjoy that every time I started over I learned something new about the game, such as the aforementioned poo stick traps, or the ability to suck my victim's blood, but I still found myself very frustrated. Apparently, you eventually make it to a large open town where you find Mina, but I never made it that far because I just wasn't compelled to keep playing. I understand that this game was complete, but don't think that this game not being released is any great travesty. But I will probably bust it out again around Halloween for its spooky, athletic shoe-related gameplay. Next up is Sunman! Sunman was developed by EIM and intended to be published by Sunsoft in 1992. Sunman was originally intended to be a Superman game, but for whatever reason that did not happen, and then it was turned into Sunman. Sunman, like Superman, is a big burly boy who can fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes. Even the logo for the game doesn't hide the Superman origin with its design. In the game, Sunman punches his way through enemies, dodging obstacles with a mission to destroy evil, with the ability to fly by simply pressing up on the controller. There are some stages that take place entirely in the air, where Sunman is able to utilize his eye lasers. I had a great time with Sunman. I think the graphics are very appealing with nice large sprites and attractive locations. The controls were very responsive, and the flying mechanic was very fun to use. If this had been released as a Superman game, I think it would have found a satisfied audience for sure. But even if it had been released as Sunman, I think this is a game that people would look fondly back on today. I am unsure as to how far along this game was into development, but I know what I played was a very enjoyable experience. It is my understanding that you can play this game all the way from start to finish, and that is something that I will make sure to do. I had a great time with this one, and I think it's a shame that it never came out. So the last game that I want to take a look at today is Happily Ever After, that was set to be released in 1991. Happily Ever After was based on the 1989 film that served as a sequel to the story of Snow White. The film was fraught with legal issues, including a battle with Disney, and even though it was completed in 1988, it wasn't released until 1993. The NES game fell victim to this ongoing litigation and was cancelled before release. I vaguely remember this film. I know that we had it on VHS when I was young, and my family watched it pretty regularly. But the only thing I really remember about it is the female dwarfs, which I thought were pretty funny at the time. I don't have a lot to say about this one. It is incredibly ugly. I find these graphics entirely unattractive. They just don't look good. Again, I don't remember this movie very well, but I have no idea what is going on with these enemies. Like, what the hell is this thing? Your attack is a spinny spin, which is odd. The control is very stiff. I often found myself not jumping in the way that I had intended to, if I even jumped at all when I pressed the button. On this first stage, you are given a special flower power that you can use to place a platform in water in order to cross. I assume that there are additional powers you are granted in future stages, but I did not make it far enough to find out. This is one that I doubt I will ever come back to. I have no idea how far along in development this game was, but I don't think any amount of work would have made this one worthwhile. I don't think it is any great loss for the gaming world that Happily Ever After was never released. I guess there is an SNES game that was eventually released that is a completely different game. So there you go. There are 5 unreleased NES games. Let me know what you think. Have you ever played any of these? What do you think of them? If you haven't played any of these games, do any of them look interesting to you? Are you going to check them out? And please let me know if there are any unreleased games or prototypes that you think that I should take a look at, because I'll definitely be making more videos on this topic in the future. I'd like to thank everybody for your time. Thank you for spending it with me. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.